Welcome to this afternoon's Washington Insider panel. The goal of this panel is to sort of give you a broader sense about what's happening here in Washington before you head up to Capitol Hill tomorrow, and just generally as we work on important issues related to malaria and the battle against malaria. I'm really excited today to be joined by two close friends and colleagues. Lindsay Plack is Senior Vice President at the Glover Park Group for many years. She was in senior leadership at the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, which works to support foreign affairs spending by the United States government and American leadership on foreign affairs. I am also on the board of USGLC, and we are huge supporters because we recognize that we can't get full funding for malaria if the overall foreign affairs budget does not increase. Before that, she worked on Capitol Hill for a Republican member of Congress who was on the House Appropriations Committee. Jackie Quinones is at the One campaign, where she's Senior Director of U.S. Government Relations. Before Jackie joined the One campaign 5 years ago, she was a senior professional staff member of my old haunt, the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So her knowledge about Congress and foreign policy making is quite strong. So she worked for a Democratic ranking of the Foreign Affairs Committee. So it's great to be joined by Jackie and Lindsay this afternoon. We're going to have a little conversation about hot topics and then turn it over to you all for questions. And so the first question I have is, if you would look on Twitter or Facebook or turn on the television, you would assume that Republicans and Democrats hate each other at their core, spend all their time yelling and screaming at each other, and here the two of you are on stage, you're not yelling, you're not fighting or screaming at each other. What does that say about Republicans and Democrats working together in Washington?
Well, I'll start, and you can add. I would say that this is exactly how Washington works, but it's not newsworthy when people get along and get stuff done, and so that's often not what you see on the news or not what you see on Twitter, but it really is true. And I think that generally in DC you find a lot of camaraderie and a lot of bipartisanship on a lot of issues, and I would say specifically for what you guys are here for, in fighting for funding and programming to combat malaria, that's even more true. When you look at foreign assistance programs broadly, the support on Capitol Hill for them is truly bipartisan. You can find the most progressive member of Congress and the most conservative member of Congress, and more than likely they will have very similar positions on the need to combat malaria globally or support foreign assistance kind of broadly. They might differ in some, nuts and bolts or that kind of like small stuff, but generally there's a lot of bipartisan support for these issues that is really important and moves the needle forward for us. And Jackie and I are friends. We're all friends.
We are. We do actually like each other.
We do like each other.
Yeah, I guess I completely agree that it's just not as newsworthy to talk about how people get along. So I think that's part of it. And I also think I've given this a lot of reflection over the years, because sometimes it's challenging that issues of foreign assistance are often not headline-making issues, and that can be hard sometimes, but I think it also creates a lot of opportunity. The number of offices we've spoken to who have said, it's a lot easier for me to support these issues if it's not the number one thing people know about me, and I can do it kind of quietly. And so there's actually a lot of cooperation, because it's just not going to be the main thing on the news at night. And so it really creates a lot of space for cooperation and bipartisanship, and it created a lot of space for me over the years working on and off the Hill with my Republican counterparts, because we knew that our bosses wanted us to get it done. I just had coffee this morning with one of Senator Risch's key Republican staffers. I met her 10 years ago when she worked in the House and I worked in the House, and we're still friends 10 years later, and we were just talking about how in DC we're able to acknowledge our differences and say, okay, great, we're not going to agree on that. How do we work around it? How do we find a solution? And so that's definitely been my experience the entire time I've been here. It's been pretty productive in a lot of ways.
I think that's so true. And the one other piece I would add is that members of Congress are hungry for that action and bipartisan cooperation. I mean, they hear and watch the same news we do,
And they hate it.
and they come here and they realize, like, that's not really what DC is like. Like, let me find something to prove otherwise and prove to my constituents and show my constituents that I am working in a bipartisan manner. Because you see a lot of polls where, voters want their members to cooperate and get along. And that must be so frustrating for a member of Congress, because it's like, we are cooperating and getting along on a lot of things. Yes, there are differences, and there always will be. But on a lot of things, there is space for bipartisanship.
And I think the other element that you really see on Capitol Hill, and you'll certainly see tomorrow, is just how cheek to jowl everybody is on Capitol Hill. And as a result, it forces people to get along, because otherwise it's going to be a very long, unpleasant day for everybody. And it really does force congressional offices. It will go Republican office, Democratic office, and they all know each other. They all see each other a dozen times a day. And it really does force people to get along. And the other element is most congressional delegations are bipartisan delegations. They have Republican members and Democratic members. And under those circumstances, you have people, members and staff, who are used to working for the common good, which they will define as what's in the interest of the state of Connecticut or the state of California.
Yeah.
And having worked on the state of Connecticut delegation for many years, we worked very closely with the Republicans and the Democrats together to advance Connecticut's interests.
That's so true. When I worked for a member from Michigan, if we had a vote coming up where we needed guidance or we just wanted kind of some feedback, we would email the delegation, the whole delegation, and say, what's everyone's thoughts? What are we thinking? Because it's the collective good of the state. Doesn't matter your party.
Now, we've seen this play out a little bit, and Jackie, I'd like you to sort of give your reflections on this, and then Lindsay as well, which is the president has proposed for 3 years running budget cuts that would decimate foreign affairs spending, including for the U.S. Agency for the International Development, the Global Fund, all the things that we advocate for as it relates to malaria. And yet Congress has battled back. To give us a sense a little bit more about how this has played out, why has Congress been willing to fight against the administration on these types of budget cuts?
That's a great question. And I think just to kind of piggyback on something that Lindsay said, there is a real hunger to cooperate on things and to sort of have achievements and have wins on issues and to feel good about things at times. And that's not always because you swatted down something the other party proposed. It's because you work together to actually build something. So I do think that a lot of credit goes to the advocacy community over decades of investment, because the result has been, tens and tens of congressional offices, some of them leaders on their committees and in their parties at this point, who we have lobbied and who we have taken overseas to see programs, and we have persuaded about the value of these programs. So that means that when someone comes along and proposes a 30% cut to the budget, they are already convinced of why that is penny wise and pound foolish. And I think that we've seen that happen 3 years running with President Trump proposing 30% cuts and the likes of Mitch McConnell coming out and saying that's dead on arrival. And that is because of the work that has gone into educating those offices and persuading them over years and years. So I think that that's made a huge difference in terms of our ability to build a bipartisan coalition that will resist a harsh budget proposal. And it really just goes to show the wisdom of that investment, because you can have a president who can really dislike your programs, but if you've really made that investment in Congress, you can fight back against it. So.
Yeah, that's so true. I'm trying to think of something smart to add to it, because it really does. It's about advocacy days like this. How many advocacy days has Nothing But Nuts had? So I'm putting you on the spot, but it's
think,
years and years, right?
Margaret, which is number 10?
So
I think this is our 8th or 9th.
that's amazing. So a decade of just this advocacy groups organizing and going to Capitol Hill. Then you add on to that all the other advocacy groups, the One campaign, the U.S. Global Leadership campaign, the Shot at Life campaign. I mean, this is the work, the groundwork that we as advocates have put in over the last many decades that if anyone questioned whether it worked, just look at the response that we've had from Capitol Hill over the last 3 years to the budget request, and it proves that it does work. And it's people like you, it's constituents that come and talk to members of Congress that make all the difference in the world when it comes to this.
And I think 2 points, which is that I think it's in Washington and for constituents, for advocates, it's fine to say that you strongly oppose the administration's budget request as it relates to foreign affairs, as it relates to the Global Fund, as it relates to USAID, and it doesn't put you in a particular camp as it relates to Republican versus Democrat or independent. It actually is, you're making a comment about a policy that you think is counterproductive to American interests. And so it doesn't have to be viewed as in a certain partisan lane.
That's totally true. I think every administration, it doesn't matter whether it's a Republican or Democrat in the White House or Republicans or Democrats that are in charge on Capitol Hill, or whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, there's always going to be disagreement. And so when it comes to the administration's budget request, it's just a disagreement. Now, the administration has proposed 2 years ago, a year ago, increasing funding for development finance, which is another issue kind of in the foreign affairs space. And that was a really great proposal and had bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. My former organization supported it. The One campaign supported it. So there's just an example of the administration puts forward one proposal that we're adamantly opposed to. That's fine. You're allowed to not agree on everything, and you can still work together on other things.
I think the other element that is relevant is that we have spent over the last 8 or 9 years developing the Nothing But Nets brand on Capitol Hill. So when we go to the Hill with Nothing But Nets logos and T-shirts and information, the message that we're sending is, when we started 8 or 9 years ago, nobody knew who Nothing But Nets was because it was primarily a fundraising campaign to raise money online, which is so important to make sure that families can sleep under bed nets and that people who need malaria treatment receive it. And so we wanted to amplify and put in an advocacy message in support of the Global Fund, in support of PMI, so that U.S. government dollars would continue to flow for malaria. But when we started on the Hill, nobody knew who we were. Nothing But Nets, I've never heard of it. And now, 8 or 9 years later, it's a known commodity on the Hill. Oh, those are the malaria people. And that's good. You know, you want to be well, you don't want to have malaria, but, you know, and walking with little mosquitoes. Have enough challenges with coronavirus. You know, I think it's important that we be viewed as the malaria people, because then when we walk in and we have the Nothing But Nets information and brand, they're like, okay, we know what you're going to ask. We're prepared for you. And yes, we'll support money for PMI and the Global Fund, and that's a good place to be in. So now, we've talked a little bit about the overall environment. What are people going to be talking about tomorrow on Capitol Hill? I mean, you know, honestly, you know, the congressional offices have bullpens in the back, which is like literally the size of the stage, and there's a dozen people working there. So it's a little bit crowded. About what is everyone going to be talking about tomorrow? Honestly, putting foreign affairs aside, what is everybody talking about?
Well, it's actually probably a good time to be talking about global health concerns on Capitol Hill. Because I think the majority of members of Congress and their staff are going to be talking about coronavirus. And not, you know, obviously that's no laughing matter, but, you know, you are here at a very important time. I think had coronavirus not popped up and reared its ugly head, members of Congress would be talking about funding issues. This is kind of a season in particular on Capitol Hill where people are talking about appropriations bills and funding programs. And so, again, this is a good time to be up here to talk about funding for malaria and that kind of stuff as well. So it's kind of that season on Capitol Hill. I imagine that'll be kind of hot on everyone's mind, and Corona.
Yeah, I agree. I think Corona will probably be the first topic for a lot of people in a very immediate way, of people wondering how soon before Congress starts working remotely. But I also think that it is the season of evaluating the budget and deciding what to do with the budget. On the coronavirus, global health issue, one thing that we've landed on, not only from our advocacy around the Global Fund, which addressed malaria, but also this year, the One Campaign advocated on Gavi. I mean, it's very true that the investments that we make in global health overall are valuable to the broader battle against coronavirus. It's not as simple as a single disease, it's systems. It's, an entire country being able to contact trace and to be able to screen and test and treat. And all of that comes from all of the program that we do across several diseases. So I think just to kind of speak to the interconnected world that we live in and the interconnectedness of our development programs, it's not as simple as funding one vaccine. It's about the entire system. And I think that it gives just a very good entryway to talk about how Nothing But Nets and focusing on malaria fits within a broader spectrum of foreign assistance that makes us all more resilient in the face of global pandemics.
Now, there's one of the advantages of having so many champions in town is that many of the people in the room are very type A, and we're type A, so that's fine, and have opinions about their members of Congress often, pro or con. And I certainly do about my members of Congress. And so the question is, how do you have ongoing conversations with your elected representatives when you already have a view? Let's say you don't like your member of Congress or you don't like your senator. I mean, how do you have meaningful conversations with people and their staff that personally not a big fan of?
I think the best way to approach this is to remember that you're not going in as a Republican and Democrat, and they're not meeting with you because you're a Republican or Democrat. You're meeting with them because they're your representative, and they are meeting with you because you are their constituent. And that's it. It doesn't really matter who you vote for. It doesn't matter your feelings or their feelings about particular issues. We all agree and disagree on different things. I'm not a huge fan of my neighbor playing music at midnight, but it doesn't mean that I'm mean to him all the time. I think we can. I know, it's a different
Sometimes.
issue. It's a different issue. But we're all adults, and they're adults, and they're there to talk to their constituents, and that's what you are, plain and simple. You're not a Republican. They don't know who you voted for. They're not going to ask you who you voted for, and if they do, they won't. But if they did, that would be hugely inappropriate. But they're not going to ask you that because you're just a constituent, and they want to hear what drove you to fly all the way to D.C. in the midst of a coronavirus outbreak and talk about malaria. That's what they want to know about.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, sometimes when I struggle with this, I sit back and I reflect on the fact that, no one is going to agree with me 100% of the time. My own parents don't agree with me 100% of the time. So to expect that from an elected official would just be, unreasonable. And so the important thing is to focus on the areas that we can agree and that we can find common ground, and to see if there's room for me to persuade them on something. And sometimes even that doesn't work, right? You go into an office and they're like, well, we have problems here at home, and they're kind of skeptical, and that will happen. But I also believe in the power of perseverance, and if you keep going in and you keep showing up, eventually you might actually make some progress with those offices. We have seen it happen again and again. Ted Yoho, who is sadly retiring, is a great example of a member who came to Congress incredibly skeptical of foreign assistance, and years later, he's gone to several countries that receive foreign assistance. He's met with groups, and he's become a total evangelist for our issues, and it's incredible. One thing that you didn't ask me, but that I will go ahead and add on, is that I think that year in and year out, you end up with new members, and it is a huge opportunity. Sometimes the members who don't know anything, and maybe their instinct is to be skeptical, are the biggest opportunities for persuasion. So I would say, even with the skeptical offices, it's always worth really giving it your all and continuing to go in, because you never know when you might change their mind.
I think half the battle, the mental battle of being an advocate, is to remember that it's like a glass half full opportunity. You have to always look at everyone as a friend and a potential friend. Someone that is already with you and will vote the right way, or someone that you hope from your advocacy will be with you and vote with you in the future. And that's exactly what Ted Yoho was 6 years ago, and now he's a huge, huge champion. And we're going to dearly miss him when he retires at the end of the year from Florida. I see the Florida table over there. So friend and potential friend, just always have that positive attitude going into all the offices.
One other thing I wanted to add to that was, I think, and I'm sure you guys are getting this from your, all of the trainings that you're doing,
We're
but
about to get a detailed training.
okay, great. Kill them with kindness. Like, you're never going to win them over by badgering them or being aggressive. It will never work. But you really can, like, I'd say, polite but persistent. Sometimes it can be hard, but it is the winning strategy every time. I can say, after almost 15 years in DC, it's a much more successful tactic.
Great. So we're going to go to questions in a second, but while people are collecting their questions, lightning round question for the two of you. Jackie, who's going to win the Democratic nomination for president? And Lindsay, who's going to win between the Democratic nominee and President Trump? We're starting with
dear
Jackie.
Lord, I definitely got the harder one.
This is in no
Is
way
this off the record?
Yeah,
This
exactly.
is off the record.
This is not an endorsement.
Nobody's tweeting about this.
is
I'm
not-
offering your personal views.
I think it will be Biden.
Okay, so we have a Biden prediction here. Now, Biden versus Trump, your prediction, Lindsay.
Oh my God.
Oh, this is off the record, no tweeting.
So awful. Let me say this.
I didn't tell them.
This is a total non-answer, but I think it'll be interesting to see I think Biden will win too. I agree with that. And it'll be interesting to see who his VP pick will be and how that sways the suburban woman voter, of whom I would consider myself a part of that contingent that is interested to see how everything plays out. I think if he goes super, super progressive with his pick, then it'll be hard for some contingent of the voters. And if he goes pragmatic, it might be easier to kind of sway that independent voter into his camp. But it will be interesting.
It will be. I mean, we could definitely spend an hour over cocktails talking about this.
Definitely
our
cocktails.
cocktails
I mean, definitely in order to lubricate the honesty. But I think that there is also a risk on the other side that, if he beats out Bernie, then the people that you lose are the progressives. And if you get someone who's too middle of the road, you won't get the enthusiasm of getting that turnout from the Dem side. So it's going to be a fraught and full 7 months,
There we
however
go.
long we have.
It'll be
and
entertaining.
It can't be over too soon.
Can't not be over too soon. And it's barely begun. So, great. Questions? Questions. Raise your hand if you have a question. It can, as I can see, it can be about politics. We just talked about
Yeah.
politics and the world kept spinning.
Make us really uncomfortable.
Yeah. If you guys keep asking, it might get less awkward.
Great. Is there a question over there? Yeah. Hey, how are you?
Hi, how are you? So I'm Cozy Joseph. I'm from Florida. And this is my very first time ever doing this, and I have no idea what to expect, okay? I mean, no matter how much you read about it, I'm sure it's going to be different. So can you share with us your perspective on what to expect tomorrow when we go there on Capitol Hill? Because I'm very excited about it.
That's a really great question. So I'll give a couple tips that I have, and I'm sure Jackie has some too. So first of all, be prepared for anything. I think whatever you've read probably won't even prepare you. Capitol Hill is such a interesting and, I will say, special place. I started my career there. I know Jackie did too.
I did too.
It is like nothing else in the most amazing way. You will be walking down the hall and see members of Congress and staff just kind of like walking everywhere, and there's a flurry of activity, and there's a million meetings going on. I mean, it is like really, really cool to experience it, especially with them being in Congress and so much going on right now and so many conversations about coronavirus. So specific advice that I will give you. Be very flexible. Be prepared for meetings to last longer than you expected or be delayed. That is the way it works. Be ready with your pitch. Have like a 2-minute pitch, a 5-minute pitch, and a 10-minute pitch, because that might be the time that you get. Meetings on Capitol Hill are usually like 15, 20 minutes. If you get 30 minutes, you've like hit the gold mine. Be prepared for hallway meetings. I think hallway meetings on Capitol Hill are like quintessential cool hallway meetings. A staff member sometimes is so busy, or a member of Congress is so busy that there's 4 meetings going on in their office and they have no more space, and so you just kind of cozy up to the hall, to the wall, and have your meeting. And that really is like, embrace it for what it is. It's a busy place. The work of the people is getting done. Members are busy. There's, hearings going on and all that. And just be flexible and have fun with it. And the other thing I would say is, and we talked about this a little bit, is nobody expects you to be an expert. The most powerful thing you can do in Washington is admit that you don't know something. That doesn't mean that you won't get them an answer. You can jot down, if they ask you a question where you're not sure of something, just say, you know what, I'm not sure. Those probably be a volunteer or a nothing but not staffer with you who may know the answer. If they don't know the answer, that's fine too. Peter, somebody else will email them and get them the answer when, after all the meetings. So just take notes, and it's okay to not know. And the other thing I would say is say thank you. These members of Congress hear a lot during the day, especially staffers. They hear a lot during the day. They often don't get thanked for their hard work, or what they support or what they vote for. So even if you're not totally sure of their record, or if they're not totally supportive of everything you're in there advocating for, you can still say, thank you for taking the time to meet with us today. Really appreciate just having a few minutes to tell you why I'm here in DC. It goes a long way to being remembered and appreciated.
Yeah, a couple of things I would add to that. The hallway meeting I was going to say. So, yep,
Love
those
a good
happen.
hallway meeting.
I don't know if there will be votes tomorrow, but I remember first starting on the Hill, there's these like buzzing noises that it'll be like, it's kind of like a school bell, and that will sort of just happen in the background, and anyone who works on the Hill is totally unfazed, but you're like, what was that?
Is that a fire alarm?
And those are to call votes, so don't worry about those. Yeah, very, very busy place. And there was something I was going to add. Oh, if it's supposed to be with a member, expect them to show up like in the middle of your meeting, and then you have to start over, and that's okay too. And they're just kind of there. They're very good generally at just being friendly and chatting you up and getting the picture and then leaving. The staffer is really the person who you want to get. And the last thing I would say is, again, I think this is something that was strange for me when I first came to DC, is how ready they are for you to just tell them what you want, right? Like, it just feels like weird.
the ask.
You don't do that anywhere else where you're like, here's what I need from you. But that's what they want, right? They're busy people, and it's helpful for them to be really clear and say, here's why we're here, here's what we want. So don't feel awkward about that. I personally found that kind of hard to get used to, but that's helpful for them, so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good
And the
advice.
staff are young. I started on Capitol
Yeah.
Hill when I was 20 years old, and I would meet with the constituents, and then I would talk directly to the member. So
Yeah.
it's a very young place. So, other questions? Questions?
You're all
Politics?
experts.
Don't be shy.
Malaria? The Hill? Yes. I know you.
You know me. I know you. I hadn't had the microphone in a while, so I was getting, kind of antsy. No, but so if some of us, schedules are going to really vary. Some people are going to have back-to-back-to-back meetings. Some are going to have a few hours. What would you recommend doing in and around Capitol Hill if you have a few hours to kill?
Oh, that's a good question. So I know there are hearings going on. I'm fairly confident there are foreign affairs, like interesting foreign affairs committee hearings going on tomorrow, especially in the House side.
I think Pompeo might be on the Hill tomorrow.
Maybe, yeah. So try and get a seat in a hearing and listen to the back and forth. I will tell you that a hearing on Capitol Hill is like nothing like what you see on TV. It's like a totally different dynamic when you're in the room, and it's kind of fun, and you can kind of just sit there quietly and take it all in. So you can always do that.
And we can get a list of hearings that are going to be being held tomorrow.
Perfect. The other thing, which I should say, like, stay on the Hill, but the U.S. Botanical Gardens is super close to Capitol Hill. You could go there. If you have, like, an extended period of time, you could go there. and hang out. I think they have like bald eagles there now or something.
Like live bald eagles?
I'm pretty sure.
That's not
I could totally be
she's
making that
making
up,
that
but I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure.
It's right
It
on the
is
base
incredible.
of Capitol Hill. They do not have bald eagles.
It is beautiful,
Although
though.
they do, they could be stuffed.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so the Botanical Garden's right there. It's really right next to the Rayburn Building. The Library of Congress is right there. It's beautiful.
Oh,
Supreme
yeah, the main
Court
room
is
at
right
Library of
there.
Congress is
Yeah,
beautiful.
that's a
Those
good
are all
one.
right there. Depending on, the office, your congressional office will often be more than happy to give you tickets for a tour of Capitol Hill. So if you have some time to kill, that's something that you can do as
Or
well.
like the House floor.
Yeah,
you could
going to the
probably
floor.
you could probably go, like get tickets for the gallery and sit in the House gallery if they're in session, depending on when they come in.
Yeah, and the
It'd be fun.
Capitol Visitor Center, where you'll be in the morning, is a great, they have actually an exhibition area in the back. And you get to see, every state is allotted 2 statues of noted people from that state. And some of the statues to be displayed in the Capitol, and some of the statues are actually in the Capitol Visitor Center, including, I think, King Kamehameha, I think is
Yes,
there.
he
Yeah,
is there.
So there we go.
He's there because the weight of that
It was too
statue
heavy.
was too. It was like falling through the floor of the actual Capitol building, so they had to move it to the Capitol Visitor Center.
Yeah, it's
Fun
gold leaf. It's quite
fact.
nice, yeah.
Good job. This is a little random and also very wonky, but I think it's in the Russell Building, or maybe it's on the House side, where basically whenever you see anyone on like MSNBC or CNN and they're interviewing someone on the Hill, they're always in this one rotunda.
Oh.
Is it Russell
So
or?
the
Yeah,
can-
it's
the
Russell.
It's in
Cannon-
Russell.
There's a Cannon Rotunda, but it's the Russell Rotunda. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So-
if you go up there, you could just people watch and just see
Yeah.
senators rolling through to do their like 5
we've-
minutes on
we've-
MSNBC and then leave.
And we've actually done member-level meetings
Right away.
where I had constituents
Oh.
from Connecticut, and the Connecticut Center was being interviewed, so we just staked out, and then he ended his interview.
It
and
feels like being
we
on
got
a
a meeting,
set.
so there we
Like
go.
it's just
Yeah.
kind of a cool, fun thing.
You know, if you stalk people, it's amazing what you can get. And then, and so I mean, there's all great
kinds of good
suggestions
stuff,
and
yeah.
things to do
Just
on the Hill.
people watching
One thing I
is
do want to
fun.
mention is we're starting today with 2 members of Congress, Representative Barbara Lee and Representative Chris Smith. And
fantastic.
both are longtime champions on malaria-related issues, on foreign affairs issues. They do not agree on most issues, but they agree on malaria. And so we're
Malaria might be the only issue.
it could be the only issue. In fact, it probably is. But in any event, Barbara Lee, she is on the Appropriations Committee. She may be the next chair or ranking on the State Foreign Ops Subcommittee, which gives away all the money. And she represents Oakland, and she's very progressive. Chris Smith represents suburban New Jersey and is certainly on the more conservative side, cares in particular about abortion-related issues. Anyways, he's on the Foreign Affairs Committee and one of the most senior members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So there you go. So they're both great champions and allies, and so it's nice that we will be able to see them tomorrow morning in action. Any last questions? Oh, yes.
For those of us who are having meetings with members of Congress who are already foreign aid champions, what would you see as like the key priorities and objectives for those conversations so that you're not just having a pointless love fest conversation with them?
Well, love fests are few and far between, and they're always fun for the member of Congress. So don't be afraid to do that. That is perfectly acceptable and, lovely for the member. My favorite question to ask a member of Congress who's already on board with something I'm there to talk about is, who else should we be talking to? They have friends. You'd be surprised who is friends on Capitol Hill. And I'll give this as an example because I know he talks about it all the time and he talks about it on TV all the time. But Trey Gowdy he retired, but he was a very conservative member from South Carolina. I think became famous during the Benghazi hearings. He was kind of the Republican questioner during the Benghazi hearings. And so that time got very partisan. He's a lovely man, but very conservative from South Carolina. His best friend, Joey Kennedy, as he calls him, Joey, most people call him Joe Kennedy,
I
Congressman
don't
Kennedy.
even think Joe Kennedy's friends call him Joe.
I know. Trey Gowdy calls him Joey. Best friends. And that was through just working together. They didn't know each other before coming to Capitol Hill, but working together on different issues, traveling together, really, really close. And so you might, when you ask that question, you often get these kind of interesting relationships or interesting anecdotes from a member of Congress about who they know that might have a story that's of interest to the issue or some kind of connection like that if you ask a question like that. And then in turn, I would make sure that Margaret and everybody at Nothing But Nets and the UN Foundation team know that information because it's gold for advocacy.
And it's often is through the gym because a lot of
Yes,
members
yeah.
of Congress in general don't bring their families to Washington anymore. And so most of their families are at home. And so they spend more time in the gym because, they're up early in the morning and they're working out. And so there's a lot of members of Congress that become good friends in the gym just because, they're not hanging out with their kids. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And I would say don't let them get off the hook by saying, well, we need help with the other party. Go ahead and press them to be specific of, well, who in particular do you think would be useful for us to talk to? I also always just find it really interesting if, just to ask, what are the other issues that are really big priorities for them right now? Just because it gives you some context. It gives you potentially another angle to think about if you're going to go back in or in terms of, giving that information back to the staff here in D.C. So I think that those can be really good. And yeah, like Lindsay said, go ahead and take the moment to enjoy that, that solidarity that you get in that 5 minutes, because
We'll
it might
take
not be how all of your meetings are.
Well, I'm deeply appreciative that both Jackie and Lindsay were willing to spend time with us this afternoon. And so please join me in thanking the two of them for joining us. So.